What is up, guys? I'm feeling so fine because this is video number 9. That was terrible. I'm sorry. Um, but let's pick up where we left off. We talked about the Watergate scandal and Nixon resigning. But we're going to move ahead. We're going to look at the end of the Cold War and kind of move on from there. So in 1980, there is a new president that takes over, and his name is Ronald Reagan. Um, Ronald Reagan's actually an actor who becomes president, and he's a pretty crazy guy. He is really tough on Russia, but he begins a very less strenuous, less strained relationship with the new prime minister of Russia or the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev. They have a bunch of meetings, and eventually leads to these fundamental changes in the Soviet Union that end up really just ending the USSR and ending Soviet Russia once and for all in 1991. Now, Russia was kind of on the decline as it goes anyway. So Russia after World War II was super flying high, but slowly over time they start to have some issues. And by the time that Gorbachev becomes the prime minister of the USSR, they're struggling. They really are. And so, really, a big monumental kind of culminating thing about the end of the Cold War is the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, which we talked about in previous videos, um, allowing East and West Berlin to kind of get back together, and then eventually the collapse of the USSR in 1991. The Cold War is officially over. Yay. And America can focus on itself again, right? We don't have to worry about Russians blowing us up. We don't have to worry about, nuclear war and space race and all this stuff that have been plaguing the United States since the end of World War II. So we move forward. Now, just talking about Reagan, he's really interesting, and he's really kind of this first post Cold War president. He is the first post Cold War president, and we're gonna look at his economic policies. So he has this thing called trickle down economics. Um, it's nicknamed Reaganomics, but I'll try to explain it the best I can. Usually I have a whiteboard and I can kind of show you what's going on in the classroom, but I don't here. I'm just surrounded by antlers and yeah. So it's going to cut income rate from it's going to cut income tax rates for everybody, especially the top earners. So which means it's going to drop income tax rate from 70% down to 50% in 1981, and then again in 1986 to 26%. So you're seeing this huge thing, and you're like, I don't understand what that means. It essentially means people can make more money and not have to give so many taxes to the government. And what this is going to do, what he wanted it to do, was so who I guess is my capitalistic brain. Who are the most important people in an economy? You're going to say the worker. No, you're wrong. It's the people who employ the workers, right? Without rich people, without businesses, people wouldn't have jobs. So I know I'm going to get some flack from that, but whatever. So by decreasing the income tax from the highest earners, the thoughts were they would reinvest that money back into their company, which would raise the income for workers. It would allow companies to expand, do all this stuff. Not necessarily what happened within Reaganomics. It was kind of rough, but you're saying, okay, why do this in the first place? Well, Reagan's economic plan, like I said, let's cut taxes. Let's from especially the top earners, businesses, stuff like that, and the wealth then trickles down. The more money the business had, like I said, the more they could give out. Now, unfortunately, this was only successful for about 3 years because businesses did not reinvest. Their CEOs and their owners started taking more and more money, which as a result, forced the interest rate to increase to almost 40%. So it was at 26, 28%. And then because this wasn't working, he's forced to increase the income tax rate to 39% because people can't afford um, basic needs. So it's a thing. It didn't work. But I digress. Really, Reagan did a lot, some good things, some bad things. It kind of depends who you talk to. He was very, very well spoken. I'll give him that. Um, but big thing he's known for is being the president that ends the Cold War. So let's jump ahead. Let's look at the next president. I know I'm going crazy here, but we're almost to the modern day, and I'm super excited about it. So let's look at the election of 1992. Whee! This is between George Bush, the first one, not the last one, the one before his daddy, and Bill Clinton, and this guy named Ross Perot. Don't worry about him. So at this point, the economy was in a recession. So that wasn't because Reaganomics. So Reagan was president for 8 years, and then Bush Senior took over as president for 4 years, and now we're looking at what would be Bush's second term. Okay, he loses, and it's for a few reasons, right? Like I said, the economy is in a recession, and Bush's involvement in the Gulf War is going to hurt him in the polls. For the first America, for the first time in an era of peace since the Cold War, they didn't want to be in the Gulf War. They looked at Bush and were like, "Dude, we're happy. We don't want to deal with this stuff." And the incumbent that was George H.W. Bush is defeated by William Clinton. Clinton wins 370 electoral votes to 168. Now, Clinton's a kind of a different type of president. Now, it's weird. You kind of, as time progresses, you see how presidents change, and they change with society. And Clinton is a different type of president. He capitalizes on being different. Uh, he's not like every other president. He goes on television shows. He goes on Saturday Night Live. He goes on talk shows. He goes out and plays the saxophone. He's like he appears to be a more everyday kind of guy, right? So he's liked by people because people can relate to Clinton. They feel like he's one of them. He's also a very, very good public speaker. He's able to give speeches that are at a level of understanding for the American people. Now, I don't want to say like the American people are dumb, but he doesn't talk like this ivory tower president. He talks to the people, not at the people, if that makes any type of sense to you. He's also very much willing to work with Republicans, Democrats. He's a Democrat. He's very willing to work with Republicans, which allows his popularity to rise. Before this, you were very attached to your party, but Clinton's like, you know what? Let's go ahead and work together. He does. Now let's look at Clinton's economic philosophy. Clinton runs on an economic platform of balancing the budget, right? So even now, I've showed you guys the debt clock before. We're trillions and trillions of dollars in debt. But he wanted to lower inflation, lower unemployment rate, and continue traditionally conservative policies of free trade. So he's essentially stopping prices on goods from increasing while at the same time continuing policies from Bush and Reagan's with regard to trade, which means we're going to keep prices here, but keep trading at the same rate. So he's really helping people keep money in their pockets, which when people have money, they spend money, which spurs an economy. like I said, he ends up passing the American budget. He works very, very closely with then Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, and they actually balance a budget. Now, Clinton, like I said, is a different type of president. Um, a lot of young people, and this is a demographic that still struggles to vote, but we really see a bigger voter turnout for presidential elections by young people with Clinton because Clinton's like an everyday guy. And that's what people see. And so it really encourages young people to get out there and vote. Now it's kind of interesting. This new decade, the 1990s, paved the way for a generation that had never seen a major war. If you think about that, every generation has seen war for the most part, right? We go back to the beginning of the 1900s, right? If you were born in 1900, by 1918, World War One had happened. And then, 30 years later, World War Two. And then you enter the Cold War and Vietnam and Korea, the Gulf War. And it ends in 1991 or 1980s for the most part. But this is a generation of people, a generation of young people who've never seen death and craziness and war that happened before. A lot of people didn't really see the Cold War as a viable war. Like I said, by the 70s and 80s, the Cold War is like, dude, the Russians, we don't like them, but they're not going to really attack us, so whatever. It's more of an inconvenience. The government's it's a government plot. It's government propaganda, which really does lead to the distrust of government and authority figures in general, which is like the second coming of a counterculture. It's kind of crazy, right? So these young people like Clinton, not like Clinton, but they like him as a president, and they see the country changing, and they see that they have a new voice, and it's considered kind of a second counterculture that was seen in the 1960s. We're seeing again in the 1990s. People growing up, no war. We don't like the government because they keep telling us all this stuff is going on. And so let's move forward. And I'm going to get off track because I do love me some 90s. Um, I think the 90s are the most influential time for music. And music is always evolving, obviously. But the 90s, there are more styles of music that come out than any other decade ever, 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 ever. Most things, up to this point, you had one or two types of music. You had like country and rock. That was about it. But the 90s, you see grunge rock, rap, hip hop rock, country alternative rock. You see house music, all this crazy stuff. Like the 90s, the music is awesome, right? And you guys have no idea because new music stinks. But the first time since 1942, the 90s was free from war and the threat of war. Young people start to distrust those in power, like I said, and there's this culture of self-preservation. I talked about the greatest generation. That's those World War II fighters. The 90s is this idea of self-preservation. And it starts as early as elementary school. School-age kids are told to question their teachers, resist conforming to the status quo of generations past. So this caused a shift in education. And I find this interesting because we're in education of all. Education stops focusing so much on learning and starts focusing more on feelings, bullying, helping others as opposed to scholastic competence. Right? You grow up in elementary school, and I'm part of this, and I grew up in the 90s, so I feel you, and you guys are kind of in this too. all the time. They're saying like, oh, you have to share. Everybody's a winner. Here's a trophy. You know how many trophies kids get when they're young? It's insane for doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's crazy. So we see this generation in the 90s becoming these, we don't like the government. We're worried about ourselves. We don't trust our parents. We don't like our parents. The music we listen to tells us not to listen to anybody and just worry about ourselves. That's the 90s as far as culture goes. Now, along this time, the World Wide Web becomes a thing, the dot-com boom. In 1994, the World Wide Web enters general space. If you guys ever wonder why it says www prior to a website, that's the World Wide Web. Right? So this is a new thing in 1994. The ability to communicate instantly and research instantly is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Startup companies start just creating websites, and their stocks just go through the roof. And this is anybody with a website, because there's a couple of websites that all of a sudden made just stupid amounts of money. And so everybody starts buying websites and making websites and selling them. So you start seeing just stock markets climb and climb and climb and climb and climb. But eventually, too much is not a good, is always a bad thing. So, like most industries, the World Wide Web and their innovators expanded too far, and there were too many companies. So all these companies that made millions and millions of dollars off the bat, all of a sudden start seeing their profits decline by millions and millions and millions of dollars. And this pretty much ends right around the early 2000s because of over expansion. Um, there's only a few companies that dominate the market. So we won't get too far into that, but it's just crazy how it works. Going back to the 1990s counterculture, and like I said, this might be the last one we talk about today. Woodstock '99. So Woodstock 1969, there was this big festival about hippies, and you've probably seen pictures. But in 1999, it was the 30-year anniversary, and it was right before the turn of the century. So hey, let's do it too. So to commemorate the Woodstock Festival in 1969, organizers decided to hold a 30-year anniversary. Woo! Um, it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna have people like Kid Rock, Alanis Morissette, Wyclef Jean, Limp Bizkit, Rage Against the Machine, ICP, DMX, and just a whole bunch of other artists. Now, if you don't know who any of those artists are that I just told you, look them up. So over the next few days, hundreds of fights, destruction of property, overdoses, at least one death, sexual assaults, causing including 4 cases of rape, and all ending with all of the stages being lit on fire. That was Woodstock '99. It was a terrible thing. Again, go check it out. There's videos about it. There's documentaries, so I encourage you. But it turned out being the opposite of the original Woodstock. The original Woodstock was all about peace and love. Woodstock '99 turned into a fiery pit of fire. It's not good. So, but this is again just looking back to the self-centered generation that was what we call Generation X. Um, do what you want when you want. Have fun. Don't listen to authority. It's interesting. Well, until next time, guys, take it easy. We're almost through this thing, so stay with me, bear with it, and we'll keep knocking it out. Have a good one.